Well, the conflict between Iran and the United States is only spilling into the heart of the Gulf's commercial lifelines. After firing missiles and drones at US military bases across West Asia, Iran now appears to be expanding its target list, striking key trade and logistics hub in the Gulf. Explosions have been reported at major port and shipping facilities, including Dubai's Jebel Al Port and Oman's Duqm Port, both critical nodes in global shipping and energy supply chains. Drone strikes have also hit commercial port of the port of Duqm in Oman, injuring at least one person, while a separate attack targeted an oil tanker off the Omani coast near the Strait of Hormuz, a waterway through which a large share of the world's oil trade passes. In Dubai, fires were also reported at a massive Jebel Ali port, which is one of the busiest container ports in the world, after debris from an intercepted aerial strike fell into the facility. The strikes mark a significant shift in Iran's retaliatory campaign, what began as missile and drone attacks targeting US military bases across the Gulf, including bases in countries like UAE, Qatar, Bahrain and Kuwait, now appears to be targeting the region's economic infrastructure as well. And now the region's most powerful economic bloc, which is the Gulf Cooperation Council, has issued a strong warning. The GCC says that Iran's attacks on ports and shipping are a direct threat to global energy security and supply chains. The Council has even stressed the necessity of the immediate cessation of Iranian attacks to ensure the safety of international trade routes and the stability of global energy markets. Gulf officials have also warned that targeting commercial ports and shipping lanes risks triggering a global economic shock, given that the region handles a significant share of the world's oil exports and container traffic. And to discuss the maritime impact of the ongoing war, we are being joined by Dr. Ian Ralby. He is president of Auxilium Worldwide and a recognized expert in maritime security. Appreciate you joining us live. He's joining us live from Baltimore. Mr. Ian, we understand that the Strait of Hormuz is quite significant and it has taken a hit, of course, when it comes to the global supply chain. Your first thoughts on the impact on the Strait of Hormuz and how it is being seen as a great impact on the global supply chains altogether.
Absolutely. I think, many speak about the supply chains focusing on the energy sector in the region, and that is extremely important. We have a huge amount of oil and gas leaving the region for global markets and affecting the price of oil through the OPEC system. However, we also have to remember that these ports are also the lifeline for goods coming into many of the Gulf states, and those goods aren't just clothes and electronics, it's also food. There are critical supplies that rely on the maritime space for access to the large populations in the Gulf. And unfortunately, the closure isn't just about global energy markets, it's about local populations having access to food. And so the situation is actually much more complex and intense for some of these states than is even being reported thus far. So the Iranian Navy made a statement yesterday saying that the Strait of Hormuz was now closed. As a matter of practice, however, ships were still going through and are still going through. The freedom of navigation is something that is very hard to close off, but they are trying to do so by force. And unfortunately, they have an ally in the region that has been known for the last few years in helping close maritime waterways, and that's the Houthis. The Red Sea is also a critical lifeline, and today we hear from major maritime companies that both the Red Sea and the Suez Canal are also being avoided in order to ensure that there aren't spills or attacks in those two critical regions. So a good chunk of world trade is being affected by these attacks, by this retaliation, and it isn't just about the rest of the world's markets, it's about these states along the coast as well.
Yes, and also the fact that Trump has said that Iran wants to get to the negotiating table. Can Strait of Hormuz be used as a significant bargaining chip in the talks going forward by the Iranian side?
Absolutely. And in fact, for years, that has been one of the key points of Iran's back and forth with the United States. There's been a gray zone war or conflict for a number of years. And since 2019, Iran has very adeptly used attacks and hostilities in the maritime domain to signal specific actors and particularly to engage in this back and forth with the United States and with Israel. And part of the overall statement, in addition to specific messages to individual actors, has been, look, as much as you can sanction us under the maximum pressure campaign and other initiatives of sanctions, we can also sanction global maritime commerce because we control this critical strait. And if you recall back to September 2019, the Abqaiq attacks on Saudi Arabia's Saudi Aramco facility, even that was targeted at the marine fuel facilities in Saudi Arabia. And so for years, the Iranian regime has used the maritime space as being the domain by which it aggresses against other actors and against the US and Israel in particular. And the Houthis were actually imitating that. They took it on a different level. But that brings us to the point that we must be very concerned about the maritime supply routes in and out of the region and about the security of the wider region, where we have not only the Houthis, but also piracy as a potential upsurge. And when capacity is stretched in order to maintain the land-based attacks on the regime and retaliation, protection against the retaliation, we also have to be concerned that there won't be enough assets to be able to maintain a complete presence on the maritime space. That is a looming threat. And small craft, small drones, small activity can have big impact, especially against vessels engaged in maritime commerce that aren't inherently protected.
Yes. Dr. Ian, IRGC says that 3 oil tankers from the US and UK have also been struck by missiles near Strait of Hormuz. Coming back to the earlier point you mentioned, could Suez and Red Sea route could be targeted next?
Absolutely. And in fact, we've seen authorities in the Suez indicate concern around particularly tankers traversing the canal. If a vessel were to be hit and it was a tanker and that caused a spill, it would make operations through the Suez indefinitely closed. And so we are getting to the point of real concern for the expansion of attacks. Today, there was news that Iran not only launched missile barrages at Israel, but potentially even tried an attack on Cyprus that far afield. And so if they're aiming that far into the Mediterranean, certainly the mouth of the Mediterranean and the Suez Canal and the Red Sea itself are fair play. And with the Houthis looming, this could be a multi-front conflict very soon. The Houthis have been mobilizing for a while now. They've been quiet for much of the last 6 months or so, but they have been very adept over the last year in not just attacking vessels, but sinking them. And so they are very conscious of what is needed. And what they unfortunately found was that the high-end missiles, the high-end armaments were not what was actually most effective at sinking vessels. It was lower technology drones that they were able to mass produce themselves. And so we have a couple of key concerns, especially because the Houthis have also been establishing an alliance with al-Shabaab and other actors in the Horn of Africa and the African continent. And so there's a lot more that could spill out as the days and weeks ahead begin to show just how many reverberations may come from this attack.
Yes, Dr. Ian, just last point. In your thoughts, do you think India's exports could also be hit by Strait of Hormuz restrictions?
So India's had a complicated situation for quite a while. When the Red Sea effectively closed to a lot of container traffic a couple of years ago because of the Houthis, what we saw was that the critical Indian ports, in particular Chennai, were seeing a major decrease in traffic because vessels were going straight from Singapore in Southeast Asia down to the Cape of Good Hope to circumnavigate Africa altogether and avoiding the Asian markets and Indian market specifically. And so what we're likely to see is a shift in trade routes and trade flows as vessels contend with a much greater risk picture that is likely to cause a bit of chaos for a while. So yes, it is likely that the trade routes will be affected. Additionally, we may recall that in the early days of the Houthi attacks, there were several attacks on vessels by Iranian long-range drones off the coast of India, within the Indian Exclusive Economic Zone, the Chem Pluto, the Chem Silicon, the Pacific Gold. These vessels were struck by Iran off of India. And so there's a chance that if Iran feels that it needs to message or to push back against Indian interests, it may do so by attacking maritime commerce off the Indian coast as well. So this is a very fluid, evolving picture, very rapidly changing, and a lot of dynamics at play because unfortunately, we're talking about a large and powerful armed force of a country that has been under an oppressive regime since 1979, fighting for its survival. And that means that there's going to be a lot of decision making that is being made by new actors in new positions, given that some of the key actors have been taken out. And so a great degree of unpredictability and likely erratic behavior is yet to come in the days ahead.
Yes, Dr. Ian, point taken. And of course, as you mentioned, it remains to be seen how the Gulf countries essentially navigate their way through this in wake of the global supply chain disruption. Thank you for speaking to WION.
My pleasure, always.